Furthest from. I think I'm just going to write. It's not going to be for work. But I guess it could be, if I needed it to be. I look outside. It's like 6 degrees out, and I can hear the slight din of the wind-driven snow colliding with the old glass windows. It's not an inspiring setting. A cold, snowed-in cabin resting on a featureless plain. The closest town is 30 minutes away in good weather, and there's no place to be because of the damn plague. I'm constantly reminded by our matching black and purple masks hanging on the coat rack next to the door. It's March. Again. And I lost track of how many Marches there have been since Russell and I quarantined ourselves here. It's always been March for all I know right now. It sounded exciting. Nestled away on a permanent vacation with the love of your life. But maybe it's so cliche. Breakaway parts of it, and sounds more like the start of The Shining or Cabin Fever. We were naive when we left the city. Newlyweds, getting the wedding done just under the shutdown wire. Extended honeymoon. What a perfect combination, too. A writer for a major entertainment studio to spin yarns to pass the time, and a biologist for figuring out how to be safe and when it would be okay to go back to the city. And, of course, their little dog, Casey. It's really the first time I ever had doubts about it. Whether it's the fact we sit across from each other on our own computers 8 or 9 hours a day, but we never say anything. Or at least once a week, I wake up at 4 a.m. and start an adoption application. It's not time. It's not a good time. The time is coming soon. Is what I hear in my head every time we cross eyes at the table. Well, damn it. What if it's never time? Maybe that's enough for today. This isn't helping. And the big mouse is calling. Second entry. Russell surprised me with one of those space projection dome lamps. He thought it was help. He thought it would inspire me, get my mind someplace else. I initially shrugged when he showed it to me. The images on the box weren't very inspiring, and I doubt they'd be half as good in real life. But I hugged him and said thanks. It dawned on me that this was the most variety in terms of conversation we've had in days. We went to bed around 8. What else was there to do, after all? I feel like I'm skipped midlife and I've become my grandmother. He made the same comment he makes every night. We get disillusioned by 3 different streaming services. He said he hoped my writer's block would clear up soon, so there's actually something good to watch. Which is all well and good, but deadlines are approaching. And so came to the desire to post deadlines. The deadlines were the storylines beaten to death from someplace else. Beaten to death from someplace else but 30 years ago. Writing felt less creative and more like making a copy of a copy of a copy until it was so blurry that to the untrained eye it looks something entirely new. Anyway, he plugged the tissue box-sized dome into the wall. He plopped himself down on the bed with the remote for the device in hand. He asked me to kill the lights, which I did. I hesitated for a moment in joining him. I really can't say why. I held my breath in and turned stiff on the comforter. I could feel him looking at me, but it wasn't him. I had this deserted feeling when I step outside and I see the snowpack glittering back at me like a million indifferent eyes. Russell cleared his throat, and then he reached up and made an exaggerated click with the remote control, and the device whirled. And it first cast a mediocre rainbow of green, red, and blue laser show pinpricks of light on the ceiling, and along the top of the walls in a swirling blizzard. I was so unimpressed I still hadn't bothered to breathe as my discomfort with lying down grew. It was a reflecting on itself as I grew more uncomfortable trying to understand why I felt so uncomfortable. The aching, surging, strangling, and infuriating pain of inaction, of confinement, of imprisonment, which crept in when I hit the pillow at night. Those feelings started to loosen as the dome lamp started to kick back into focus. As if by magic, what began like a sparkler took on the form of a panoramic. Fireworks grand finale bursting with stars, comets, asteroids, black holes, and planets stretching nearly down to the floor. I felt myself relax and finally exhale as the dome enveloped my imagination with a near 3D-like soaring, sweeping tours of some alien solar systems, with green gas giants, rocky blue moons, and a comet blazing like a burning piece of magnesium, and a brilliant red sun. Russell looked at me with a big grin on his face. It reminded me of the first time I saw him. His mind blown, hitting a bong for the first time at some college house party. It really was an infectious grin. This was blowing my mind too. He put his hand on me, and it was just fine as I lost myself in the clear blue planet with just one little green continent. It's funny, what's on that little planet? That little island? It was that stupid house. And that stupid house party from a time I'm not certain I'll ever see again in my lifetime. I think I was there with Amy, Naomi, and I think Mark Dwellers. Maybe that was some different party. It was a different party. He would have graduated a year earlier. Well, it would have been great if he was there. He would have been a better beer pong partner than Amy, but I guess I'd never tell Amy that, especially now. Tricks of light, shadow, and perspective made the planets, moons, and comets real, down to their alien surfaces, while tricks in my mind made this place, time, and people feel real again. I played it in my head, hitting rewind, fast forward with ease, but I started to feel like I was genuinely feet down on those creaky, worn wooden floors, the pot-potpourried air, the beer-washed waltz, the Red Hot Chili Peppers washed-out conversations, the bright warmth of that infinite beach sun streaming in. It was so real, my brain and toes started to tingle. I felt like a wild animal let out of its cage, headbound for the nearest woods, no hesitancy to live in this moment again. Live it like it was now, and without social fear or social distance. I wandered around that house like a mouse in my own maze. I'm not sure why this is the time and place stabbing my brain. I haven't been anywhere with anyone with a face other than Russell. I could have thought about Mom and Dad, or Jenny and her beach house, but no, I'm here. And I'd rather not leave now that I'm here. I looked out the window, and I could see the planet-sized ocean roll placid waves up on all 360 degrees of sand, married to the waves. But I felt no sense of isolation. I felt like I chose to be there, and the sea, or not I, could go anywhere else in time. I finally came to the little corner den where Russell was sitting, hitting that bong for the first time with Casey, barely just 2 years old at his side. He wouldn't let her leave his side, even at a party where he was off his ass. He was always watchful and protective of her. There was something very admirable about that. I can't remember exactly what I did now to get his attention. Oh no, that's right. He tossed a ball for Casey, and it took a funny bounce on my leg. Somehow in this memory, though, he just sat there, grinning that grin. He seemed distant and detached, like he was dreaming his own dream in my space-light trance. As I watched on, his face frozen with that increasingly stupid look, I saw a long, dark shape appear on the horizon out the window he sat in front of. Casey, not frozen, let out a whimper as the long shadow of the sky dagger enveloped her and Russell, and slowly the room, everyone I remembered being there, started to react to the shadow blotting out the sun. The air turned chilly, and then several V-shaped aircraft seemed to descend from the sky dagger and swarm overhead. The partygoers took cover behind the furniture and retrieved an assortment of unusual guns from beneath the floorboards. I stood in amazement as we watched through the window. The silver, thin V-shaped craft floated about 10 feet above the beach, washing the sands with an intense sapphire glow beam from their underbelly. With a flash of lightning and a thunderous bang, something like a CGI wireframe of a human-like figure emerged from the sand bathed in a blue beam. The wireframes were filled up with an intense light, like filling up a beer glass with liquid lightning. In a matter of seconds, an army of armed aliens materialized in the sand and began an orderly march up to the party house. That's when Russell started to snore. I snapped back to the bedroom. The space lamp was off. I was in the dark. My mind felt worn out. Worse than 15 hours straight in the writer's room, in the studio for a deadline. The air was stale. I'm drenched in sweat. I am the unrequited love of the Sandman. Stripped of the loving embrace of sleep. It is windy outside, and it's about 2:30 in the morning. Third entry. Insomnia and deadlines are a terrible combination. Just like a smoking habit in anything but the warmest of climates. I found my half pack I hid from myself just before lockdown. It seemed like a good time to ditch the things, during an emerging respiratory health crisis. But every time I took Casey for a walk today, I had them in my coat, lighter and all. Every time getting closer and closer to lighting up again. Something about the whole thing with that party house. I don't know what to call it. It didn't feel like a dream. It felt like a memory, but it felt more real than real. Anyway, by the third walk of the day, I already put a cigarette between my teeth. It made off like I was smoking it with my freezing breath, and then I decided to crumple up the pack. There was something about the way Casey looked back at me each time that made me finally destroy it. I sat on the snow-covered tree stump at the end of the dog run and looked up. It was no use. There was no sun. It was like trying to look through gunmetal. There were also no V-shaped landing ships either, for that matter, which I suppose would be preferable to the steel-low and barbed wire-wrapped sun. Russell and I talked at dinner. We always talk at dinner, but we actually talked about something for a change. Usually it went something like he's looking forward to seeing the show, or he saw some buzz about it on the internet, or he saw a trailer for it. Because that's what we did. We played it off like I wasn't part of a writer's room. Sure, the whole franchise was, no big deal. I suppose I like that he was genuinely excited, even though I was, always thought that the minute I got up to go pee, he would sneak around my laptop and read my storyboards and scripts. I knew he would never leak anything out or jeopardize my job, but I still got the impression he was actually not too surprised with what bits I wrote, made it into production, made it into the screens. Or maybe it was because the franchise is ultimately a paint-by-numbers exercise now anyway. A kiddie Lego set with only so many ways to reinvent the mousetrap, no matter which way you look at it. And no matter which way you assembled it, there were already millions of digital voices ready to crucify it. Anyway, I digress. We actually talked about something real for a change, like I said. We talked about my little trance the other night with the space lamp. I didn't tell him about the whole content of it, just that it was like a lucid dream, a waking memory, a waking daydream. A pretty awesome simulation, even. In retrospect, the state itself was frightening because of how real and how fun it was. Much to my surprise, he told me he was drawn into an intense memory of our wedding as he started to remember it more. I could see unease break on his face. He admitted to me it was the last time he felt like he accomplished anything. Maybe the only time he accomplished anything great. He said it was something he was thinking about a lot lately because despite his other academic accomplishments and efforts, he pointed out to me and admitted to me that he was no better nor making any more progress on the pandemic than anyone else at this point. He swallowed hard, and I could tell he didn't want to tell me that. It was something we didn't try to talk about anymore. He just stared into his food. He told me if he had any better memories of that party. I remembered he might want to trance out and try to imagine that moment all over again, too. It sounded like it opened my mind and made it all like it was happening again. If he could do that, he would want to. He told me if the space lamp helped make planets out of my memories and my imagination let me walk through them again, it was better than doing other things, at least for now. He told me he wished he could come through, though. Writing all this down now makes me wish I kept those cigarettes. 4th entry. Russell was beat after dinner, and he fell asleep in front of the TV. I lied in the bed, and after trying to walk through my memories without it, I eventually resorted to turning the space lamp back on. A whole galaxy in a dome, and somehow I found myself right back at that beach planet, in that house. As I seemed to fly in from afar, I was able to get a much better look at the Black Dagger spaceship blotting out the sun over that little island. As I zipped in, I could see the topside, and it wasn't really shaped like a blade, but actually an aggressively charging rat, with hind legs and rump up, spikes of fur probably housing space weapons at each tip, its eyes glowing red, its wedge nose forward, dark circular ears sprung forward, and forearms and claws swept back as if in mid-sprint. I fell into the planet through the atmosphere, through the roof, and stepped through the threshold as time ripped forward, like a red firework like slugs ripping through the walls. I saw Amy, Naomi, and other party-goers tip over furniture and pop up to return fire with their blue beam firing weapons. Someone from behind me rushed to get some cover as more red bolts thundered through the plastered drywall wood, blasting fiery bits of lethal confetti throughout the air. The blue beams crackled like loud, static electric discharge. The person who pushed me low was Mark Dwellers. At this point, I just went with it. None of this happened. He wasn't at the party, but he was now, and this all seemed pretty exciting. I could hear the pounding of boots swarm around the house as much of the firings inside stopped, and Amy and Naomi switched from returning fire to heading towards the basement of the house. Naomi and Mark seemed to shield me as we made it through the main stairwell as more red bolts were exchanged with blue beams to the windows and doors on the lower level. I caught a much better look at the soldiers. They were tall, but very wide, with a black rifle grafted into each of their pale, sagging arms. Some kind of ammunition or power cells dotted their stubby legs, while their midsections were covered in armor, which looked like a mail of black ceramic dinner plates tactically stitched together. They were adorned in a cape-like, bright yellow fabric bearing the image of some kind of serpent. Their face was the most alien, which, well, what I assumed was their eyes covered in some sort of reflective visor, and their enormous protrusion like a huge nose with a single combination nostril plus mouth. Or dare I say, some sort of sphincter dripping some sort of sickly green and yellow bile into a pale blue leaky wrap tucked under their chin. We got to the basement where the enemy soldiers were already climbing down a storm window into the other side of the long dark room. Naomi and Mark flipped over some elaborate chairs and reached underneath them. The chairs whimsically blinked in and out of sight for a moment as the body of a small spacecraft seemed to swell up from the ground and engulf the chairs. Naomi and Mark in its fuselage. The crafts were long pointy cones with the point facing towards the wall. They glowed a blue and seemed to deflect the red bolts as the odd shot landed on their hull. The cones seemed to levitate, and the blue color swirled around the exterior of the craft, faster and faster as if powering up. Amy looked at me and beckoned me to find the button under my chair. I reached underneath. I had a sense of adrenaline going, and I wasn't sure what I was looking for. She abandoned her own chair and came to help me. Before I could say thank you, my chair started to vibrate, and I felt a sense of weightlessness as I started to become encapsulated in a cone all of my own. I took one last look at her as she was hit by a red bolt in the back of the shoulder as she returned to her own chairship. Her head and body immediately faded to ash, and her gun and gear dropped to the ground. The bolt came close enough to my arm and hand I could feel the heat and the burn. It was seriously painful, and it took me all out of the experience. But then I realized I was kind of trapped in it. I didn't just pop back out of it like last time. I was being confined to this little spaceship, which was fully constructed now, lifting up through the ceiling and roof of the house, and joining a formation of fellow friends and partygoers in similar ships as we accelerated far and away from the planet and a marauding rat ship. The wound felt like I'd hit the funny bone of my elbow 60 times a minute, as burning electric sense surged and radiated up and out through my arm, down my hand, into my fingers, and rushed up my shoulder. It was this twist of dream to nightmare. I wondered where Russell was as we evacuated the house. I woke up as the stars started to spiral. The space lamp was set on the timer again, and it was switched off as I came to. Russell is still on the couch, and I went to go write this down before it made no sense. Unlike a dream, and just like last time, this didn't fade away. It's stuck in my head like it actually happened. It didn't just make no sense the longer I wrote. And my arm really does hurt like it did under the Stardome. I'm sitting here asking myself crazy questions about this all. Entry 5. I took a few days off from writing here. I had to. I had to reread all of this from the beginning again. It still all makes sense somehow. It's still all as good and durable as any real memory that I've ever had. And my arm still stings like I broke a Christmas tree light bulb and then pressed the tiny current coursing between the filaments directly into my skin. I winced enough times while trying to work that Russell noticed, and he took a look at it. He thought I might have pinched a nerve, something I needed to hydrate away, or it's all in my head. If he only knew what has been roaming around through my head every time that damn space lamp pops on. I've done enough psychedelics in college to know what they're like, and this was sort of close. Right on the verge of some sort of disassociation. I checked the bread for mold, the attic and the basement for molds. I knew Russell checked for it in the house before he moved in, but something was very wrong. Even if everything else seemed painful, tearfully normal all the rest of the time, the imbalance between the star lamp trance and everything else pushed everything out of focus, out of perspective. The only time I felt a little more comfortable was walking the dog. Finally, the cold air and the mountains of snow were good for something, numbing the 10,000-volt buzzer buried under my skin between the bones of my arm. Russell came out to talk to me on the 6th dog walk of the day. We started talking about my arm again. I told him it was fine. There was nothing he could do if it was all in my head. He sat down with me on the big tree stump and wrapped his arm around me. He told me I had a wonderful mind, an imaginative mind that ran wild and free. He was being encouraging and supportive. He hoped someday I'd be writing a series all on my own. I felt like an imposter, a pretender to the throne he set up for me as I was struggling to regurgitate a few episodes for a played-out franchise. Even my trances weren't terribly imaginative, but I guess he wouldn't know that. He started talking about that college party again, the one where we first met there with Casey. He smirked, a little embarrassed by it all. Believe it or not, we don't do a lot of drugs together in that last year, but the best way to describe my space lamp experience to Russell was that I was crossfaded, my mind swaying back and forth between rapid-fire thoughts from the weed and the slow, sickly stomach virus of being too drunk. I didn't tell him about the whole trance thing, but I told him I felt out of sorts, bouncing between racing and engulfing good memories, and the rest of my day was like skidding out on sandpaper. He told me he understood the drunk part. He went on to tell me that, maybe I was experiencing some high-grade cabin fever, and we'd take a ride when the weather cleared up in a few days. I sat there in disbelief. The question was right on the tip of my tongue. He grabbed a leash from me and started to head back to the house with Casey. I exhaled and just straight up asked him about the party, about hitting that bong and getting crossfaded, and how come he couldn't actually relate to that. He cocked his head, and with a straight face, he said he didn't remember ever smoking any weed at any party or any time. He said if I thought it might make me chill out a bit, he could be persuaded to swing by to the dispensary for me and get secondhand with me. The pain throbbed in my arm harder than it ever had as he walked back to the house with Casey and more or less left me in the snow. 6th entry. A freak storm blew through, and the snow is almost up to the windows on the west side of the house. I guess I'm lucky just to have heat, power, and internet at this point. Where and when did I start screwing up all my memories? Maybe Mark, Amy, and Naomi were there after all. Maybe Russell wasn't at that party after all. But now Amy's not there, right? So it was always just Mark and Amy then? Or Mark and Naomi? I spent some time piecing through old photos, but the digital format for that lot of photographs was obsolete, and trying to convert them more or less corrupted them. I didn't know what was happening to me, but for the first time I wanted to put down that a tiny, tiny corner of my brain. I'm seriously wondering if that space lamp is cursed or something, and it's actually taking me to this strange dimension and time for real. I've been hesitant to be around the space lamp. Fortunately, Russell falls asleep in front of the TV streaming most of these nights. Where was Russell in my galaxy now? I found myself piloting my cone in a small squad of my friends who escaped the Star Rat's attack on the party planet. My chair was now like a recliner floating in the middle of the cone. A hemisphere of visual and sensor displays surrounded me. I tried to touch the floor and the sides, but they gave way slightly, but crackled and hissed back as I pressed. My little ship was apparently made of some kind of static electricity rubber protecting me from the vacuum of space. I could see the faces of my friends in the fleet on one screen, so I touched it with the hopes of figuring out where we were going. We were headed to the White Planet to try to defend it from the chronomatter ray of the space rat, as it was attempting to turn entire planets back in time, and then freeze them out of phase with normal space-time continuum, as invisible monuments to the rat's eternal supremacy. The vessel was normally protected from attack from the chronomatter, and was only vulnerable when it was about to use the device, so this was our last stand. Apparently, I also held the key to the vessel and its commander's secret, or so I was told. My eyes went cross from it as the exposition flooded in. I suppose like any contemporary narrative, an awkward exposition scene was necessary, something to fill the gap between one series of explosions and another series of explosions. Ahead, my screen showed me the space rat on long-range telemetry. I readied myself for some sort of high-speed, laser-heavy attack on the massive black spacecraft with my friends. One of the screens in the craft went to static, and then to a transmission from the rat ship itself. A phalanx of those sphincter soldiers bristling with arm cannons and adorned in their yellow serpent capes surrounded the Rat Admiral. Unlike his alien soldiers, I got the impression the Rat Admiral was human, based on the shape of his body. But I couldn't be sure, since his head was covered in a sleek, shiny black motorcycle helmet and visor, with a dark purple chin guard and air vents. The Rat Admiral addressed me directly by name. He made an appeal to our apparent similarities. He told me we weren't so different. He told me we both wanted to recapture a moment in time and preserve it for all to see and experience in their own way. But that moment doesn't really change. It was about the build-up to the feeling it again, as if it were for the first time. He said he was going to turn back time and freeze it at its greatest moment. There will be no more good times or bad times, he said. There would only be the best of times. Again and again and again. Entry 7. I came back in from the snow globe. I had worn a trench almost thigh-high in the snow around that tree stump. Boots and paw prints trampled back and forth uncountable times. This was where the wound that has become my life refused to scar over. When I came back inside, it was all over the internet. It was the delay, and with that delay was the very public firing. They say the best writers write what they know. I let it all slip away. The best job, the greatest writing job there could be. Rehashing cosmic wizards, warlocks, and warlords. The same stilted, hierarchical morality, recast, reshuffled, reheated, and spoon-fed to be ruthlessly mocked and blindly loved into pointlessness. How many days had passed? How many days had I let drift away between bed and the table, between the table and the tree stump? From there to past, far, far away, the memory furthest from the reality, the recollection furthest from the truth. Russell was in the spare bedroom working. He had the door slightly opened. I saw him feverishly typing on social media chat windows. Casey was on the spare bed asleep. I decided to go to the one place I felt like I belonged. 8th entry. The Rat Admiral broke off the communications as our little cone fleet crisscrossed the rat, drawing red bolts from its tail, ear tips, and its fur-like spires around its back. As expected, our blue pulses did little to the whole, but suppressed some of the firing points. We bought time until the mouth opened, and the red eyes turned a dazzling, brilliant gold. The chronomatter was being compressed and made ready to attack the white planet. And with its charge-up sequence, the mouth of the rat began to crack open, revealing its most vulnerable entry point. We dove deep into the woven exterior of the rat, evading red bolts and several blocky enemy fighters, which spewed long trails of black exhaust. We rolled up the back and then twisted down to the underbelly to avoid the bulk of the cannons and most of the winding trenches of superstructures, and then banked hard into the open maw of the spacecraft. We fired the remainder of our weapons to punch a hole into the force field protecting the chronomatter control deck from the vacuum of space. The force fields were so strong, only my cone made it through, while Mark and Amy's cone fighters were caught in the field. They pushed me forward to remove the animal at the center of the temporal core, to stop the chronomatter and undo the damage to the Rat Admiral has done to the galaxy. My cone crash-landed on the chronomatter transmission deck, and I exited with 2 weapons which looked vaguely like crossbows, and mowed through a legion of the sphincter soldiers who attempted to swarm me. I seemed to gain in marksmanship as I drew closer to the chronomatter core, which was shrouded in white mist, but I could definitely see some kind of creature circling around inside of it. I stepped into the mist and found a round table, crackling with gold glitter energy. To my bewilderment, I saw Casey chained to it, running circles around it, turning a crank in the middle. I instinctively unchained Casey and brought her outside of the mist. As we emerged, I found myself surrounded, not by the sphincter soldiers in their yellow, but very short, bearded black and gray uniformed humanoids, with a digital screen for a face arrayed around the Rat Admiral. The digital screens flashed bold all-caps profanity and insults across them almost non-stop. The Rat Admiral addressed me. He asked me how I could have possibly done what I've done. He told me that we can't move forward or backward in time now. That he was doing the best he could for me, to make it the best. That we were here, even if everything was literally wrong, we could share the greatest moment, the greatest accomplishment in our lives, again and again. He waved his hand, and all those little bearded screen people displayed the same moment in time. It was Russell and I, getting married at that courthouse with all those people in attendance on a bright sunny day in Hollywood. The Rat Admiral's black and purple helmet bisected vertically and then snapped open, revealing Russell's face. Russell held out his gloved hand and begged me to put Casey back, to join him in celebrating our first anniversary with the promise and hope the next one would be far different than this one. He pled with me, saying it was not time yet. I grew weak as the gold energy turned to dull gray and white, and the ship seemed to start to break apart. Russell wasn't really there. This was some kind of trick. It was all a trick by the rat. The ship itself began to implode. I saw a bulkhead smash the Rat Admiral and his officers, as I was pushed back into the mist of the chronomatter core itself with Casey. Everything went dark. I felt weak. Most of my body was stinging with pain or felt oddly numb, like it had fallen asleep. I came to in a dimly lit compartment of the shattered rat ship. I got the sense I was just simply floating aimlessly in space, that I was trapped in the little crushed tin can part of the vessel, adrift. I called to Casey to see if she was okay, and for some warmth. There was no Casey the dog anymore. There was just a little girl. She was about 8 or 9, I think. She had pigtails and wore a plain purple short and blue jeans. I had no idea where she had came from. She spoke to me and told me the ship was broke, but that I could rescue us. I had no idea how and what she could mean by that. I had no concept of the technology in play. But she told me it wasn't technology, it was something else. She didn't say anything else for a time, as I scoured the entire remnant of the ship for hope. Then she said, "Mommy, I'm hungry." I stopped dead in my tracks. I was exhilarated and scared and somehow ashamed all at once. I started at first, but then I had to tell her, apparently my daughter, that I didn't know how to get food, fix the ship, or how to get out. My daughter shrugged her shoulders and then said, "Of course you can get out. How did you get in?" And then something finally clicked in my head. I did get here. I did follow this path, but I made it up. I could make up more paths. I could visit any planet, any star, any time, and any universe I could see in that lamp. I had dozens of adventures. I had a dozen lifetimes. I had time with the real Russell, in a universe of endless possibilities with my real friends and my real daughter. We traveled, we brawled, we gambled, we ate, we drank, we sweat. It was all in my hands the whole time. I didn't want to write anymore. I have too much living to do. I only close this by saying that sometimes, in the shadow of a nebula, in the tail of a dark matter comet, in the moment of a full eclipse, I can still sometimes see the rat, and sometimes I can still hear the Rat Admiral in that synthetic Russell voice. A shadow cast upon my brain. He appears as an apparition to beg me to come back to him. Back with him to some plague-infested backwater planet called Colorado.